right, you guys. Next guest speaker of the evening, we've got the one and only Kush Sarin. Let's give it up for Kush. Kush is going to talk to you about building the world's greatest relationship with the world's finest product with the world's greatest clients. Let's go ahead and bring it over to Kush.
All right. Am I good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sweet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rapport. Rapport is my favorite part of the presentation overall. It's where I really get to know my customers, spends time building a relationship with them. Most times I actually go over time on my demos just because I focus so much on rapport. If I don't have good rapport with my customers,
Especially today, huh?
Especially today, I had a 2-hour service call just because I spent so much time talking to the guy, getting to know his family. So I really love it. What my mindset around it is that we're not just salespeople. We're not going to these appointments to get in, get out as quick as possible with a set. We're there to build relationships, build long-lasting relationships so that you can become friends and they can be your customers for life. So that should be your mindset going into all your appointments. I've spent, just like today, I spent 30 to 45 minutes, even more spent building rapport on presentations. And those most times tend to be my best, my highest sales and my favorite demos. So I'm gonna give you a couple of tips on how I typically focus on building rapport. First of all, I always, this is something I always start out with, just asking layers of questions. So it's not just surface level questions like how old are your kids? What do you do for work? It's what I like to ask when I first get to my presentation is, so Mrs. Jones, before we do get started, I always like to take a little time getting to know you a little bit. So tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? Some hobbies. And then from there, for example, if they tell me what they did for work, I will ask them how they got into it, why they chose that field, where they went to college, how they like it. So make sure you're asking a lot of deeper questions, not just surface level stuff, so that you can actually get to know your customers and why they should do what they do. And if they have kids, ask how old their kids are, how many, what sports, what schools, what do they like to do. So make sure you're asking a lot of questions, a lot of follow-up questions. So yeah, ask layers of questions. Tip number 2 is to find common ground with your customer or find their hot button. So what they like to talk about. For me, recently, that's why my demos have been going so long. I've been connecting with my customers. Sports is a big one for me. A lot of people I've been seeing are really big sports fans, and I am as well. So I can talk their ear off for like an hour just about sports alone. If that's not their hot button, obviously it might be their kids, it might be their job. And the way you find their hot button is same thing I said before, ask layers of questions and eventually you'll find what they like to talk about. And people will go on and on and on talking about it because what do people like to talk about most?
Themselves.
Exactly. So find their hot button and the rapport will be instant. So that's number 2. And then tip number 3, this is just like a little extra one that I like to do is my body language when I go to demo. So shoulders back, I'm smiling, a lot of eye contact. Treat them like you would your friends. So if you're meeting a nice friend, how would you act with them? Act that just like that way with your customers. So show them that you respect them and that you're there to have fun. That way they'll respect you and you'll start to build a relationship. So tell a lot of jokes throughout your presentation. That way they like you more, start to build that relationship. Body language, smiles, and eye contact. And one final thing that I will leave you guys with, deep rapport and relationship building. It always leads to more sales, always a higher average order. People don't buy Cutco today because they people don't buy Cutco because they like you. They buy Cutco today because they like you. So rapport and relationship building will lead to more sales, higher average order, and most importantly, more recommendations. People aren't going to recommend you to their friends if they don't like you. So focus on building rapport. 15, 20, 25 minutes, as long as it takes to really, until you feel like you have a true relationship with your customer. So that's just general rapport. A couple extra things I always like to include is knife rapport and then cooking rapport. This is just some extra stuff that I like to do during my presentation that helps me get a higher average order and also close more. So knife rapport, I usually just ask them a couple questions and it gets right before the disadvantages of common knives. So make sure you jot these down. First, what I asked is, how many nights on average are you cooking in the kitchen? How many nights are you cooking in the kitchen? Are you doing big meals for breakfast and lunch as well, or is it just quick stuff? Who cooks more, you or your husband? Do kids cook for themselves, or are you cooking for them? How much would you spend on an average night eating out? That way you can get a gauge of how much they're spending, and if I pay, oh, was this good for that? I'll also like to ask how much do you spend on groceries per week? Because if they're spending 100 to 150 per week on groceries, that's $400 a month, and that's a ciggy right there. So always ask how much they're spending on groceries per week. Another question I like to ask is how many place settings would you you have if you were entertaining? So 8 is typically a homemaker, 10 for a signature set, and then 12 for an ultimate set. That just gives you a gauge on if they like to entertain or not. And then this is another question I love to ask. This one's really fire. It goes just like this. So, Mr. Jones, I know you've probably never been asked this question before, but if you could build a perfect knife, what features would you want it to have? And what do you think they're going to describe? They're just going to describe a Cutco knife for you. They're going to say they want it to stay sharp. They're going to say they want a good grip on it. So always make sure you're asking that question, because they're already going to think about what they want in a knife before you even start the presentation. So that is knife rapport. And then one other thing I like to do is cooking rapport as well. I do this right before the homemaker. A couple other questions I'll ask is like, are you doing smaller fruits and vegetables? Are you doing larger fruits and vegetables? What type of meats are you doing? And then something else that's really fires, what do you typically struggle to cut? Make sure you're not asking if they struggle to cut something, but what they struggle to cut. And that way, when you get to the pieces, you can make suggestions for them and be their kitchen consultant. So yeah, that's just my 3 types of rapport that I make sure I nailed every single appointment, because without those, you're just not going to have as high of an average order or have more sales. So yeah, that's what I'll leave you guys with.
Cool. Let's give it up for Kush.